Georgians to find healing, but also an international leader academically. And how can we manage our healthcare assets to ensure excellence in medical education and research? How can we explore and experiment with new models for delivering patient care and health education? What innovations can we nurture in preventive medicine, healthy lifestyles, and education of new kinds of healthcare professionals, from medical geneticists to health coaches? And how do we reduce cost while increasing quality? The future of healthcare in America and how it will be paid for remains horribly uncertain. Local market pressures and national policy changes apply fiscal and regulatory forces whose results are unpredictable. To the extent that it's possible to predict anything about the state of academic healthcare, I am comfortable in declaring boldly that this facet of our institution also is in good health. Turning to finance and administration, the last couple of categories. You know, we need to answer the questions about our fiscal health and financial health. Have recent financial exigencies compromised our traditions of shared governance, for example? In addressing those questions, the comments that follow represent a bit of a return to the theme of last year's State of the University address. You recall the question was posed whether Emory University had become Emory Incorporated, corporatized into a top-down organization that had given up on the traditional reliance on faculty leadership and staff ideas. It's a regrettable perception, and nothing could be further from the case. It is imperative that our community continue to strengthen both the concept and the practice of shared governance. And we have a right to expect that our forums for shared governance will live up to the charge of active engagement with the issues before us. On the other hand, we can't lose sight of the purpose of some administrative decisions. Under Executive Vice President Mike Mandel's leadership, our Finance and Administration Division has undertaken a wide-ranging initiative in business practice improvement. I assure you that this initiative is not intended to impose arbitrary inconveniences on departments, but rather to control administrative costs so that more of the budget can be devoted to Emory's principal academic mission. We're fortunate to have in finance and administration very talented and smart men and women who not only understand spreadsheets and the economy, but also value the culture of the academy. Their sole aim is to make certain that Emory has resources to carry out its academic mission. Their search for best business practices is not carried out at the expense of the academic mission. It must be done for the sake of the academic mission. Our business principles are in place to provide a solid foundation for teaching and research and scholarship and service. We need that foundation to be built according to the very best principles derived from our own experience or from the best practices that we can acquire from other universities, other nonprofits, and yes, even corporations. The way I think of it is to imagine a dance floor, something sturdier than this, where we want it to be well engineered, solidly built, resting on a rigid foundation, so that those who dance on it, our creative thinkers and artists and scholars, can do so freely with gusto, flexibility, and joy. In short, the reason to pay attention and innovate in the business areas of our university is to protect the flexibility and necessary inefficiency of academic pursuits. These efforts have not gone unnoticed externally already. In fact, it's in its June ratings issue, something I'm sure you all get from Moody's Investor Services. They wrote the following, and this is very uncharacteristic to talk about other than some of the numbers and trends. Listen what they wrote, and I quote, "Emory's governance and management is viewed as a credit strength." They're writing this to potential investors. "We expect Emory to continue to demonstrate good management, best business practices, and board engagement with credit-worthy approaches." I agree with these financial experts that this facet of our enterprise is in good health. And by the way, I'm encouraged that as Campaign Emory enters into its final 15 months, that we will improve our health still further, having this year exceeded the 80% mark en route to our goal of $1.6 billion to support academic programs, academic facilities, financial aid, and to do so, finish that by the end of 2012. Although we will not be immune from the financial challenges ahead, unknown challenges ahead, we are well positioned, in my view, to address them. Finally, let's look at the broader state of the academic community and the collective spirit, if you will. Again, I invite those who would to turn around and listen to this part. Begin by noting the specialness of this particular year. It's not escaped your notice, I hope, that Emory is celebrating its 175th year. I know it's not a bicentennial or sesquicentennial, but it's still worth noting. And you've seen evidence of the observance. We've had banners around campus, banners in part of Atlanta, banners in Decatur, special logo on our homepage, articles in Emory Report. You know, in 2 weeks we will gather on Asbury Circle to celebrate with a community lunch and with some entertainment. And on December 7 in Glenn Memorial, we'll gather to pay tribute to 175 Emory history makers chosen by a special committee as being particularly representative of Emory's values and aspirations. I hope that you would join in both of those celebrations. It is indeed an an opportunity, an occasion to celebrate. But at the same time since the last State of the Union address, our nation has continued to suffer anxiety about the economy. And it's fair to say that the impact this situation will have on our students and our benefactors, on us as individuals as well as on the university, is unpredictable and has been negative. Since last year, too, our campus community has listened to questions that were raised about Emory's commitment to ethical perspectives and principles. And there's anxiety about how we're going to resolve these questions. We will, of course, watch economic developments closely and do all that we can to ensure Emory's fiscal health and continued progress. And though our processes of shared governance and our attention, and through our processes of shared governance and attention to basic principles, we're working to maintain our commitments as an ethically engaged community. It is fitting in the face of economic uncertainty and social challenges that an anniversary invites us to look back, to reflect on the journey that brought us here, and to recall the highs and lows of our history. But it's also fitting in this anniversary year at Emory, we remember the vows and the principles that have guided us, and we must revitalize those principles and vows for the chapter ahead. So this year encourages us to look ahead, to consider that perhaps Robert Browning was right when he said the best is yet to be. But with this in mind, let me suggest that the past year in many ways helped channel our mental and physical energies in the direction they should be going in the current year, as well as inviting us to examine more closely the ways in which our actions and our rhetoric are aligned with each other and with our vision. In particular, the year beckoned us to embrace a more vital integrity as an institution. Now bear with me just briefly. What do I mean about integrity in this context? There's a great essay, Politics as a Vocation, by Max Weber, and it speaks about politicians. It describes two opposed ways that politicians live out integrity in their calling. Opposite ends. One is to hold fast dogmatically to long-term goals defined by intractable ideals, with little regard for short-term consequences. Historically, revolutions are often proceed this way, and reigns of terror follow. The other path of integrity is to honor process above all, sometimes sacrificing the vision and goals that are the very reasons for political action. Bureaucracies often operate this way and stultify creativity. Weber notes that despite their risks, elements of both styles are essential, and great leaders, and in our case we should add great leading institutions, seek to combine them so that vision and process complement each other rather than undermine each other. Both extreme styles seem to be at play in Washington this summer. In that debt ceiling debate, some member of Congress emphasized the integrity of their pledges to constituents at the risk of a potentially failed process. Others emphasized with integrity the dialogue and process at the risk of embracing a failed status quo. Both sides often justified to the media what they were doing by what their constituents wanted and ignored what their constituents needed. In any case, the loggerheads demonstrated that exercising integrity in a complex organism like a democracy is difficult, exasperating, and often beset by fog and doubt. A university, unfortunately, offers just as much opportunity as Congress for integrity to pull us in different directions. And while a university ultimately is not a democracy, it does rely on shared governance and shared vision. Every stakeholder has a voice and one or more forums in which to speak it. The challenge for us as a community is to safeguard, indeed insist on, the integrity of both those voices that would speak and those forums that would permit it. I'm convinced that all of Emory's stakeholders share an aspiration for this university to be great and good. If we sometimes differ about the definition of greatness or the path to achieving it, our further challenge is to maintain the integrity of our conversation about our aims. This is why we should put this anniversary year to good use. It's a time to remember that again and again in our past, Emory has exercised integrity in wrestling with what it means to be a great and good university in a part of the country, very frankly, that for various reasons has struggled to build great universities. Emory as a community has grappled and is planning to grapple further with the legacy, the purpose, and the future of what it means to be a liberal arts university, with excellent and powerful professional and graduate schools seeking to serve the greater good of humanity. Emory grappled with these legacies in the 1950s and 60s when the question arose about whether or not to desegregate. Emory grappled with these legacies again in the 80s when the question arose whether to divest in companies doing business in South Africa. A question, by the way, that resurfaced more recently with respect to Darfur. Emory grappled with these legacies in the 90s when questions arose about the treatment of members of our community regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And again, later, when questions arose about whether we could discuss the racial history of Emory honestly and openly, and again, when questions arose about merchandise made in sweatshops around the world. In each instance, the Emory community found a way to put everything on the table, to look at the facts, to come together to conclusions that made Emory better and stronger, more vibrant and more excellent, and along the way, establish processes from which we continue to benefit. Recall that this calendar year began with the trustees of Emory University issuing a statement of regret about Emory's entwinement with the institution of slavery in the college's earliest years. The statement grew out of conversations initiated by the President's Commission on Race and Ethnicity, and the statement preceded by just a few weeks our hosting a national conference to examine the relationship of universities and slavery. The conference culminated in a powerful moment of remembrance at the Old Church in Oxford, when descendants of Emory slave owners and descendants of the slaves they owned came together to tell stories about hardship and separation, of recognition and repatriation, of disappointment, and especially of hope. In the end, the community gathered in that old church embodied the kind of community Emory aspires to be, deeply engaged as an ethical people, guided and shaped by intellectual inquiry, and open to the full range of humanity when it is similarly motivated. Recall also the challenge of the spring and the questions arising from dissent and protest with regard to the way we provide food service on this campus. The issues surrounding that moment in our history have to do much more with much more than whether a particular company serves us breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They have to do with whether we can communicate openly and in good faith, whether we are able to assume that certain kinds of discourse and demonstration risk particular consequences, whether our arenas of shared governance are strong and thoughtful and adequate to the task of permitting anything to be on the agenda, and whether with authority there is accountability. We've already begun to answer these questions largely in the affirmative, and I call on all of us to continue to engage them with intellectual integrity and intellectual vitality. In this vein, I am grateful to to the University Senate, and to its president, Professor Erica Brownfield, for helping to carry forward these conversations. I'm also grateful to Professor Frank Alexander of the School of Law for accepting my invitation to chair a committee that will lead us in considering how we balance the sometimes competing values of dissent, protest, and community. That committee has been at work over the summer and is widening the conversation to the campus.